Hey y'all, are y'all concerned about book bans, especially in 2025? Well, I have a whole video today describing some of the trends that we need to be looking out for when it comes to book censorship, media censorship, and book banning here in the US, especially this upcoming presidential administration. So let's get into it. There have been obviously a rise in the amount of book banning from starting about 2022, and it has just blown up from there. A lot of Project 2025 includes the erosion of public education as well as the library system that we have here, and basically trying to push everything towards privatization. We are seeing that here in South Carolina, where our elected officials are really pushing for vouchers for private school, and we're using state funds to fund private institutions. And that is that first step to eroding our public education, because why can't we use those funds to improve our public education system? So we are seeing different strategies coming from left and right around banning books and eroding public education as we know it today. I want to talk about a lot of different issues that, yes, will be happening statewide in South Carolina, but also nationally, and the things that you can do to stay informed and fight book banning and book censorship in your community. Something that we have been seeing a lot, especially here in South Carolina, but across the nation, is using Moms for Liberty rating systems as legitimate references for why a book should be taken off of shelves in public schools or public libraries. They have a website called Book Looks that is a huge database on different books and the most salacious paragraphs that can be used out of context as a reason to talk about graphic sexual depictions or racism or homophobia, things like that. They created this database to provide the fuel for evidence for a book to be censored or banned. These ratings are very, very subjective. And like I said, a lot of the passages that are referenced are taken out of context. And as we have seen here in South Carolina, elected officials aren't required to read the book of question cover to cover. So they are using these rating systems and these passages as evidence, even though majority of the time they're taken out of context. South Carolina is one of those states that is using this site as a legitimate resource and reference. This has very blatant and explicit ties to conservative think tanks, especially Moms for Liberty. It's a very politically biased resource that they should not using as a legitimate reference. Another red flag trending across the country is using different AI tools to solve the problem of inappropriate books. There is technology being used in Texas where they are helping to pick out these passages in order to remove them off of shelves. That's definitely happening in Texas. We see the rise of infiltrating a lot of spaces. We saw recently the Fable debacle, where Fable's AI program was giving very offensive reading recommendations to people who read diversely, such as come up for air and read a book by a white author, or you are very interested in diverse narratives. It's like you don't take white cishet men's perspectives seriously. And they weren't prepared for the way that AI was offensive, even though they had measures in place. We already know the bias of technology and algorithms using software like bookmark ed slash on shelf can be very harmful in specifically targeting LGBTQ plus books and books by people of color. Another trend that we are seeing is sweeping book bans with specific themes and targeting books outside of the gender binary. In general, a lot of LGBTQ plus books are seen as sexual in nature, even though there's no explicit sexual scene. Just the fact two people of the same gender love each other and are in a relationship, it is deemed as sexually inappropriate. Sweeping book bans is definitely a problem. We're seeing that here in South Carolina, for example. 4 out of, I believe, 5, please don't come at me in the comments, I don't read Sarah J I'm sorry, but I think 4 out of 5 of the A Court in Thorns and Roses books have been banned statewide here in South Carolina for sexually explicit materials, and one of the people on the, Instructional Materials Review Committee actually asked, "Well, it seems like this author is coming up a lot. Could we just preemptively say that their books shouldn't go in school?" And that is super dangerous to just do a sweeping ban of topics, authors, and things of the like. You're very concerned about just lumping books by topic area and saying, "Oh, all of these books talk about these certain topics," even though individually they might not meet different state requirements. For example, in South Carolina, we have a very explicit statute that talks about sexually explicit material happening on screen, and somebody who doesn't know about anything about sex can reasonably deduce what sex is by reading this passage. Those are kind of the parameters that we're working around in South Carolina. So if you're doing these sweeping book bans, and you are just wholesale banning all of these books based on topic areas, but individually they may not meet that statute, then that could be really dangerous. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there are more attempts to pass voucher systems for private schools, essentially using public funding to fund private schools, which here in the South and in South Carolina specifically is very rooted in segregation. A lot of South Carolina private schools and schools across the South were developed and founded specifically as a response to integration happening in public schools. We call a lot of schools that opened in that integration era segregationist schools. And they still have that legacy of discriminating against students with disability, discriminating against students from low income backgrounds, and discriminating against students of color, regardless if they let the students in the institution or not. If we are passing voucher systems to continue the exploitation of these groups through this private school institution, we are essentially using state funds to discriminate. We are also seeing a lot less media coverage on book censorship. It's amazing how many people that I encounter don't know that book censorship is a problem in our society. And even things like here in South Carolina, it's not necessarily book censorship, but the relationship with PragerU that our South Carolina Board of Education, specifically our state superintendent, Ellen Weaver, created the partnership of this very biased and conservative rooted ideology platform to use in our schools and use South Carolina taxpayer money to fund that program to be available in schools. I was surprised at the media coverage, but still a lot of people don't know. And that's why I do a lot of updates on my social media on how to fight book censorship and what's happening across the state. Something else that is going to be a trend in 2025 is really intense school board election. School board kind of got swept under the rug so because we were very distracted by a presidential election. And school board elections are very important to pay attention to because those are the individuals making the decisions for each individual school district. But we are seeing a lot of campaigns for school district, especially here in where I live in South Carolina. I saw a school board everywhere, and people always are talking about school board. But what is happening and what we see in elections across the ballot is that the people with the most money have the access to the best campaign marketing. And a lot of handpicked candidates who have ties with very conservative groups, including Moms for Liberty, are being funded to infiltrate school board on all levels. And so we'll continue to see handpicked candidates such as that. For example, here in South Carolina, our very own state superintendent was not qualified for the position because she didn't have a master's degree. And she got a master's degree in what I think it was like 6 or 8 months. It was like a ridiculous amount of time from a very conservative rooted university. And she was a handpicked candidate for Moms for Liberty, has deep ties. You could see all of the videos of her at their conferences and her stance on education. She's not has not been private about her relationship with them. She got in with the state board of education. In addition to the local level, we'll see that a lot on the state level for school boards as well. As far as different legislation trends, South Carolina set the standard for statewide book banning with our strict statutes and school board regulations that we have passed. And we are afraid that the very strict standards coming from the state level that are pro book censorship will become a thing across the board. They are looking to South Carolina to see how we are implementing that. They're looking at states like Utah in particular, who does a lot of legislation around statewide book banning. I believe we are the first 2 states behind Texas and Florida who are really codifying and making book censorship part of our statutes and making it easier than ever before. So hopefully we are not starting a good trend, but I'm not feeling very optimistic about that. There are also laws around access to public libraries. For example, South Carolina passed a budget proviso last year saying that public libraries may not get their funding if they have certain reading materials available in their libraries. That is making a lot of public libraries afraid of losing funding, especially in South Carolina, where a lot of our counties are rural, and losing access to that funding can be very detrimental on a whole other level for these rural communities, especially when the library provides more public resources than just reading books. A lot of places like Idaho are also restricting access in public libraries and threatening funding for public libraries. A lot of these statutes are being challenged on the Supreme Court level, whether that's the state Supreme Court or the federal Supreme Court. And people are just getting smarter in how to avoid these lawsuits. There is hope, however. We have seen victories, especially in Louisiana, with the librarian who wrote the memoir about her fight against book banning. She won in a defamation suit that she put against someone who was trying to say that she was a groomer or whatever they are trying to ascribe to librarians. She won that defamation suit for that individual calling her a groomer for providing certain books for children. So that is hopeful, but hopefully we don't see the opposite effect happening when people are bringing up suits to the Supreme Court to rule these things unconstitutional. Being afraid of having your character face defamation in the first place for providing educational materials to children, it can be very scary. So a lot of library workers and educators are leaving the field because of that pressure to conform and lean into fear because they are afraid to diversify their classroom libraries, to purchase books for their school library. They're afraid that they may get threats from people in the community for providing certain books. And just that pressure. I know for me personally, I had to leave these institutions because when you're a person who part of our values is to educate and make sure everybody sees themselves in the materials that you're educating on, and yet you're teaching truth about history of this country, then you feel that pressure to get pushed out and get silenced by the institution that you're working within. We see a lot of library workers and educators leaving the industry, and that is super scary. So these are some of the scary trends and hopeful trends around book censorship that is happening for 2025. All of these points I got from the Book Riot Literary Activism newsletter. I read that newsletter religiously. I keep up with all of the book censorship news, and I try to post as much about it as I can on my social media to keep people informed. Because, again, going back to that trend, we're not seeing it talked about in the media a lot. So I try to educate people on how to fight book censorship, what's going on, and what does this have to do with all of us? I don't have any kids in the school districts, but I'm showing up to my local school district and the state board of education meeting because I am very passionate about the future of our children and how they get educated. I am an advocate for the freedom of information and the freedom to learn. And I want everybody to have access to books as well as being able to sift between good information and disinformation and misinformation that is rampant here in our society. I am very passionate about keeping up with this. If you want to keep up with what's happening with the state of book censorship and what you can do and how you can deepen your love for reading, but use it as a tool for activism and resistance, follow the channel. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for updates, and together we're going to make a difference in the world through the lens of stories. Until next time.